80,000 Romans marched onto the plain beside the Ophidus on August 216 BCE, and by sundown the better part of them lay dead in a circle of their own making. The Second Punic War had been raging since the dispute over Saguntum in distant Iberia, and Hannibal Barca had crossed the Alps 2 years earlier to carry the fight into Italy itself. He had already broken Roman armies at the Trebia and at Lake Trasimene, but Cannae was something else entirely. The consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro had brought the largest army the Republic could field, and Hannibal had let his center bend inward like a drawn bow, drawing the legions deep, until his African veterans closed on both flanks and his Numidian horse sealed the rear. The encirclement was total. Paulus died among his men. Varro fled north with a handful of riders. The dead were counted in the tens of thousands. As the dust settled and the screams thinned to silence, Maharbal, commander of the Numidian cavalry, rode to his general with blood still on his horse. "Give him the cavalry," he urged, and within 5 days Hannibal would dine on the capital. In the history we know, Hannibal hesitated, and Maharbal spat the words that would echo for centuries, that Hannibal knew how to win a victory, but not how to use one. In our world, that hesitation held. But what if it had not? In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. Hannibal looked at the wreckage of Rome's army, and this time he did not pause. Against the patient caution that had defined his campaign, against every instinct that told him to consolidate and seek allies first, he accepted Maharbal's counsel. He stripped his force to its swiftest elements, the Numidian and Spanish cavalry, his hardened African infantry, and left the wounded, the baggage, and the slower troops to follow behind. Speed was the only siege engine he possessed, and he knew it. The roads of central Italy lay open before him, and the news of Cannae traveled ahead like a grass fire. Towns shuttered their gates. Refugees clogged the via toward the coast. Hannibal pushed his columns through the late summer heat, knowing that every day Rome had to gather its wits was a day his advantage decayed. He did not have the means to reduce a great walled city by force. He had only terror, momentum, and the memory of 3 shattered armies at his back. It might be enough. It might not. He gambled that the shock alone would do the work that his missing siege train could not. Inside Rome, the Senate convened in something close to despair. One consul was dead, the other a fugitive somewhere to the north, and the flower of Italy's manhood lay rotting on a field in Apulia. There was no field army left to interpose between the city and the man approaching it. The defense rested on hastily levied recruits, on freed slaves handed weapons, on boys too young and men too old. The temples filled with frightened crowds. Some senators spoke openly of abandoning Italy, of taking ship for some safer shore. Quintus Fabius Maximus, the old cunctator, whose strategy of delay had once been mocked and then vindicated, struggled to hold the chamber together. But delay required space and time, and Hannibal was offering neither. The unity that had carried Rome through Trebia and Trasimene began to crack. For the first time, the Republic that had never negotiated from weakness contemplated the unthinkable. And as the watchfires of a Carthaginian camp appeared on the horizon, the question was no longer whether Rome could win, but whether Rome could survive at all. Rome's true strength had never been its own legions alone. It was the vast web of Latin and Italian allies, cities bound by treaty to pour their sons into Roman ranks year after year. That web had made the Republic seem inexhaustible. Now, with the enemy at the gates and the army gone, the web began to tear. Capua, the great city of Campania and one of the richest in all Italy, weighed its oaths against the evidence of its eyes and declared for Carthage. Much of Samnium followed, and a widening circle of southern communities sent envoys to Hannibal's camp. Each defection fed the next, for no city wished to be the last loyal holdout when the reckoning came. The manpower that had fed Rome's wars now flowed the other way. Yet even here, the collapse was not absolute. Many of the central Latin colonies, older and more deeply tied to Rome, held to their allegiance, hedging against a future no one could read. The alliance system did not vanish. It fractured, and into those fractures Carthaginian influence poured. Hannibal arrived before the walls and faced the truth he had always known. He could not storm Rome. He had no train of engines to batter down its defenses, no time for the long starvation of a proper siege, while his lengthening supply lines lay exposed and his own allies watched for weakness. So he did what he had come to do from the beginning. He negotiated, from a position no Carthaginian had ever held. He offered the Senate its survival in exchange for its empire. And the Senate, missing its army, bleeding allies by the week, with raw recruits its only shield, accepted. The terms were crushing. Rome surrendered its fleet, the instrument of its reach beyond Italy. It renounced its claims abroad in Sicily and Sardinia and along the Iberian coast. It abandoned its dominion over the Italian allies, who were now free to bind themselves to Carthage instead. Rome would endure as a city. It would not endure as a power. The treaty was sealed not by the destruction of Rome, but by the careful amputation of everything that had made Rome dangerous. Carthage had never been a power of roads and legions and annexed provinces. It was a Phoenician-founded city of the sea, its strength resting on its navy, its trade networks, and the mercenary armies its wealth could hire. When it organized its victory, it did so in its own image. There would be no Carthaginian governors planted across Italy, no dream of ruling the peninsula directly as Rome had ruled it. Instead, the Carthaginian Senate, the Council of Elders directing war and trade alike, built a structure of treaties and tariffs and protected sea lanes. Ports were bound to Carthage by commercial advantage rather than occupation. Cities that had defected found themselves junior partners in a Mediterranean economy whose center of gravity sat firmly in North Africa. The genius of it was that it cost little to maintain. A subjugated Italy might have rebelled endlessly. A profitable Italy, threaded into Carthaginian commerce, had reason to keep the peace. Hannibal had used his victory at last, not to raise, but to redirect the flow of trade and tribute toward the city that had sent him. With no Roman rival left to contest the waters, Carthaginian reach extended steadily across the western basin. In Iberia, where Hannibal Barca had held the line against the campaigning Scipio brothers, the removal of Roman pressure allowed the Barcid hold on the silver mines and coastal cities to consolidate and deepen. Sicily, long the fault line between the two powers, fell wholly within the Carthaginian commercial orbit, its grain and its harbors feeding the network. The African coast flourished as the undisputed heartland of a maritime order. And Rome survived, as the terms had promised, one Italian city among many. It kept its forum and its temples and its proud memory, but it sent no more armies across the sea. The Latin tongue did not march outward on the heels of conquering legions. The roads that in our history would have stitched a continent together were never built. A diminished Rome turned inward, nursing its grievance, while the trade of three continents passed it by. Generations passed, and the sea took on a different character than the one we remember. Its common coinage bore Carthaginian stamps. Its merchants kept their accounts and their contracts in the law and language of Carthage. The protected lanes ran from the Pillars of Heracles to the Levant under treaties written in Africa, and the great questions of the age were settled in the Council of Elders rather than in any Roman curia. There were no legions standing watch on distant frontiers, no aqueducts and milestones radiating from a single imperial capital, because that capital had been bargained down to a provincial town. What endured instead was the slower, looser dominion of commerce, of harbors and tariffs and credit rather than roads and citizenship. And in the libraries of that world, scholars still mark the turning point precisely. They named the field beside the Aufidus, and the August day in 216 BCE, and the moment a Numidian horseman urged his general not to waste a victory. In our history, Hannibal let that moment pass, and Rome rose from the ashes of Cannae to remake the world. In this one, he listened, and the world was never Rome's to make.